Hey, I'm Frank, and welcome to WW2 Untold Stories. Get comfortable and listen to the story. No noise, no rush, just you and history. Somewhere in this video, I've hidden a little riddle about the events you're about to hear. See if you can solve it before the end. And soon, every one of these stories will be turned into ebooks, so you'll be able to read them anytime, anywhere. At 3:47 p.m. on March 15th, 1945, Staff Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez crouched behind a burned-out farmhouse near Remington, Germany, watching a column of German Panther tanks roll toward his position. 6 massive steel beasts, each weighing 45 tons, their long 75mm guns sweeping the countryside like the heads of hunting serpents. Rodriguez had 8 men, 2 bazookas, and one very unusual piece of equipment that his own commanding officer had called the stupidest waste of military resources in the European theatre. That piece of equipment sat 200 yards behind him in a shallow depression. A 1943 Willys MB Jeep that looked ordinary from the outside but sounded like nothing any GI had ever heard before. Under its olive drab hood sat an engine that had no business being there. A Packard V-12 aircraft power plant rated at 1,400 horsepower. The same engine that powered P-51 Mustang fighters. Someone had crammed all that power into a vehicle designed to carry 4 soldiers and a radio. The other sergeants in the 3rd Armoured Division called it Rodriguez's toy. The mechanic said it would shake itself apart within a week. The motor pool officers filed complaint after complaint about unauthorized modifications to standard military equipment. But in 17 minutes, that toy would do something no one thought possible. It would outrun German Panther tanks in a straight chase across open ground, while carrying critical intelligence that could save an entire American division. This is the story of how one Mexican-American mechanic from East Los Angeles turned military surplus into a weapon of war, how desperation became innovation, and how the fastest Jeep in World War II changed everything about reconnaissance behind enemy lines. If you want to see how Rodriguez pulled off the most audacious engine swap in military history, hit that like button right now. Every like helps us share these forgotten stories of American ingenuity. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're uncovering the innovations that won the war. Now back to Rodriguez and his impossible machine. Tommy Rodriguez grew up in Boyle Heights, fixing engines with his father. Miguel Rodriguez ran a small garage on Whittier Boulevard, where neighborhood families brought their broken-down Chevrolets and Fords. Tommy learned to rebuild carburetors when he was 12. By 16, he could diagnose engine problems just by listening to the sound. He understood internal combustion, the way some people understand music. When Pearl Harbor happened, Rodriguez enlisted immediately. The Army tested his mechanical aptitude and assigned him to the 32nd Armoured Regiment as a tank mechanic. He arrived in England in September 1943, crossed into France after D-Day, and spent 6 months keeping M4 Sherman tanks operational under impossible conditions. Mud, rain, constant combat, parts shortages. Rodriguez could make a Sherman run on salvaged components and pure determination. But tanks weren't fast enough for what Rodriguez had in mind. By February 1945, American forces were pushing deep into Germany. Reconnaissance units needed to move faster than ever before. They needed to penetrate German lines, gather intelligence, and escape before enemy forces could respond. The standard reconnaissance vehicle was the M8 Greyhound armoured car. It was reliable, well-armed, and completely inadequate for the mission Rodriguez envisioned. The problem was speed. The M8 could manage 55 miles per hour on a good road with a tailwind. German Panther tanks could hit 34 miles per hour cross-country. That margin wasn't enough when you needed to outrun an entire armoured column across broken terrain. Rodriguez watched too many reconnaissance teams get caught and destroyed. Good men, experienced scouts, dying because their vehicles couldn't move fast enough to escape. The solution came to Rodriguez while he was working on a crashed P-51 Mustang near Cologne. The fighter had belly landed in a field after taking flak damage. The pilot walked away, but the aircraft was a total loss. Rodriguez was assigned to salvage useful parts before the wreckage got hauled to a scrap depot. He spent 3 days stripping components from that Mustang. The Packard V1650 engine was still intact. 12 cylinders, liquid-cooled, supercharged. Designed to produce maximum power at 25,000 feet while pulling a fighter through 400 miles per hour dives. Rodriguez stood next to that engine for 20 minutes, calculating weight, dimensions, power output. The math was insane, but it might work. A standard Jeep weighed 2,450 pounds, empty. The Willys Go Devil engine produced 60 horsepower, adequate for hauling supplies and personnel at 65 miles per hour maximum speed. But what if you replace that 60 horsepower engine with 1,400 horsepower? What if you turned a utility vehicle into the fastest ground vehicle in the European theatre? Rodriguez requested permission to salvage the Packard engine for experimental purposes. The salvage officer barely looked up from his paperwork. He stamped the requisition form and told Rodriguez to load whatever he wanted onto the truck. Nobody cared about experimental purposes. They cared about keeping the Advance moving toward Berlin. That night, Rodriguez and 3 other mechanics used a crane to lift the Packard out of the Mustang. The engine weighed 1,400 pounds. It was 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, designed for an aircraft that cost $50,000. They were about to install it in a Jeep that cost $648. The weight alone would crush the standard Jeep suspension. The power would snap the transmission like a twig. Rodriguez had anticipated these problems. Over the previous month, he'd been collecting parts from damaged vehicles across the motor pool. Heavier leaf springs from a destroyed half-track, a transmission from a wrecked armoured car, reinforcement plates cut from scrap tank armour, larger tyres from a burned-out truck, each component individually requisitioned, officially approved, completely innocent. But when you assembled all those components together, you got something the army had never seen before. A Jeep chassis reinforced to handle massive horsepower, a drivetrain designed for vehicles 3 times heavier, suspension components rated for twice the standard load. Rodriguez wasn't modifying a Jeep, he was building a land-based fighter aircraft. The installation took 4 nights of work. Rodriguez and his team worked in a maintenance shed behind the motor pool, away from curious officers, and by-the-book sergeants. They removed the original Go Devil engine and transmission. They welded reinforcement brackets to the chassis. They installed the Packard V12, where the 4-cylinder engine used to sit. The fit was impossibly tight. The engine bay of a Willys Jeep was designed for an engine 1/10 the size. Rodriguez had to modify the hood, relocate the radiator, reroute fuel lines, rewire the electrical system. The supercharger intake stuck up through a hole cut in the hood. The exhaust pipes ran along both sides of the vehicle, like the headers on a drag racing car. When they fired it up for the first time, the sound was unlike anything ever heard in a military motor pool. The Packard roared to life with the deep, powerful note of a fighter engine. It shook the ground. It rattled windows in buildings 200 yards away. It announced to everyone within a mile radius that something extraordinary was running. Rodriguez's commanding officer, Captain William Hayes, arrived at the motor pool. Within 3 minutes, he'd been writing reports in his tent when the sound hit him. He followed the noise to the maintenance shed, expecting to find an aircraft engine being tested. Instead, he found Rodriguez sitting behind the wheel of what looked like a standard military Jeep, but sounded like a P-51 Mustang at full throttle. Hayes stared at the Jeep for 30 seconds without speaking. Then he asked the question every officer dreads. "Sergeant, what exactly am I looking at?" Rodriguez explained the engine swap, the reinforced chassis, the performance modifications. He showed Hayes the requisition forms for every component. Everything had been properly authorized. Every part had been legitimately salvaged. The modification itself violated no specific regulation because no regulation existed for installing aircraft engines in ground vehicles. The Army manual didn't cover this situation because nobody had ever been crazy enough to try it. Hayes listened to Rodriguez's explanation, walked around the Jeep twice, examined the engine installation, and made a command decision that would either end his career or make him famous. He told Rodriguez to test the vehicle immediately. If it worked, they'd find a mission for it. If it didn't work, Rodriguez would spend the rest of the war in the stockade for destroying government property. The test drive happened at dawn on February 28, 1945, on a straight stretch of road between Cologne and Bonn. Rodriguez climbed behind the wheel, Hayes sat in the passenger seat. Two other mechanics rode in the back with stopwatches and measuring equipment. The Jeep idled smoothly. The Packard engine purring like a contented tiger, Rodriguez eased the accelerator down. The Jeep moved forward with surprising gentleness. The massive engine had so much torque that it could accelerate smoothly from idle without any throttle input. At 20 miles per hour, it felt like a normal Jeep with an unusually quiet engine. At 40 miles per hour, it still felt normal. At 60 miles per hour, Rodriguez was just getting started. He floored the accelerator. The Packard engine roared to full power. The Jeep launched forward like it had been fired from a cannon. Hayes grabbed the windshield frame and held on. The speedometer climbed past 70, past 80, past 90 miles per hour. At 95 miles per hour, Rodriguez was still accelerating. The Jeep was handling the power perfectly. The reinforced chassis held together. The upgraded suspension kept all four wheels on the ground. Hayes looked at his stopwatch. They'd covered a measured mile in 38 seconds. That was 95 miles per hour average speed, including acceleration time. On a rough military road, in a vehicle that weighed less than 3,000 pounds, carrying 4 men and equipment. The fastest production car in America could barely match that speed under ideal conditions. Rodriguez brought the Jeep back to the motor pool at a reasonable 45 miles per hour. Hayes climbed out, walked around the vehicle again, and made his second command decision of the day. He assigned Rodriguez to special reconnaissance duties, effective immediately. The Jeep would be used for deep penetration missions behind German lines, high-speed intelligence gathering, emergency message delivery, any mission that required getting somewhere fast and getting back alive. But Hayes also issued a warning. The Jeep was now classified as experimental equipment. Rodriguez would be the only authorized driver. Any mechanical problems were Rodriguez's responsibility. If the vehicle broke down on a mission, Rodriguez would fix it in the field or abandon it. No spare parts, no backup support, no rescue missions. If things went wrong, Rodriguez accepted the terms immediately. He'd built the fastest ground vehicle in the European theatre. Now he had official permission to use it in combat. What he didn't know was that in 15 days, he'd be running for his life across German countryside with 6 Panther tanks chasing him, and the fate of an entire American division, depending on whether his impossible machine could outrun the most advanced tanks in the German army. The Jeep performed flawlessly for 2 weeks. Rodriguez used it for reconnaissance missions, message runs, and supply deliveries that required maximum speed. He could cover ground in half the time of any other vehicle in the division. German forces rarely saw him coming and never saw him leaving. The element of surprise combined with overwhelming speed made him nearly invulnerable. Other units started requesting Rodriguez's services. Word spread through the Third Army about a crazy mechanic with a Jeep that could outrun anything on the battlefield. Some stories were exaggerated, some were completely fabricated, but the core truth remained. Rodriguez had created something unique, something powerful, something that changed the rules of ground warfare. The German intelligence network noticed the unusual reconnaissance activity by March 10th. Radio intercepts from Wehrmacht communications mentioned reports of an extremely fast American vehicle operating behind German lines. Panzer commanders received warnings about enhanced Allied reconnaissance capabilities. One intercepted message from a German tank commander described an American scout vehicle that appears and disappears like a phantom, moving at speeds that seem impossible for ground transport. What the Germans didn't understand was the tactical revolution Rodriguez had created. Traditional reconnaissance relied on stealth camouflage, staying hidden until the mission was complete. Rodriguez used the opposite approach. He relied on speed so overwhelming that detection didn't matter. By the time German forces spotted his jeep, he was already miles away. They couldn't catch him, couldn't trap him, couldn't predict where he'd appear next. The Packard engine gave Rodriguez capabilities that no reconnaissance vehicle in history had ever possessed. He could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 6 seconds on rough terrain. He could maintain 80 miles per hour across open fields, where German tanks struggled to reach 25 miles per hour. He could climb hills that stopped half tracks, ford streams that trapped armoured cars, navigate terrain that existed in no military manual. But the real advantage wasn't just speed, it was psychological. German soldiers who encountered Rodriguez's jeep reported the experience to their commanders as something beyond normal warfare. The sound of that Packard engine at full throttle created a level of intimidation that conventional vehicles couldn't match. It announced American technological superiority in a way that demoralized enemy troops and confused their tactical planning. Rodriguez used this psychological advantage deliberately. On reconnaissance missions, he would approach German positions at moderate speed, allowing enemy forces to spot him and prepare defensive measures. Then he would accelerate to maximum power, creating that distinctive fighter engine roar while disappearing across the landscape faster than German gunners could track. The message was clear. American forces could go anywhere, anytime, and there was nothing the Wehrmacht could do to stop them. The technique worked so effectively that German commanders started issuing orders specifically about the high-speed American reconnaissance vehicle. They positioned additional anti-aircraft guns to engage fast-moving ground targets. They stationed motorcycle units at road intersections to attempt intercepts. They even requested Luftwaffe support to hunt for Rodriguez's jeep from the air. None of these countermeasures succeeded. Rodriguez was operating with a speed advantage so massive that traditional defensive tactics became irrelevant. He could outrun aircraft at low altitude. He could disappear before anti-aircraft guns could adjust their aim. He could cover so much ground so quickly that by the time German forces responded to one sighting, he was conducting operations 20 miles away. By March 12th, Rodriguez had completed 17 reconnaissance missions without sustaining damage or casualties. His intelligence reports provided Third Army commanders with detailed information about German defensive positions, troop movements, and supply lines. The speed of his vehicle allowed him to gather information from multiple locations in a single mission, creating a comprehensive picture of enemy activities across entire sectors. But Rodriguez's success created an unexpected problem. His missions were so effective that German intelligence began to suspect American forces had developed some form of advanced reconnaissance technology. Wehrmacht communications, intercepted by Allied codebreakers, revealed German concerns about secret American vehicles and experimental high-speed equipment. German engineering units received orders to investigate captured American vehicles for evidence of new propulsion systems. The attention worried Rodriguez's superiors. Captain Hayes briefed him on the intelligence intercepts, explained that German forces were actively hunting for his jeep, warned him that his next mission might face prepared opposition. The element of surprise that had protected Rodriguez for 2 weeks was disappearing. German commanders knew he existed. They were developing tactics specifically designed to counter his capabilities. Hayes offered Rodriguez the option of returning to standard tank maintenance duties. The jeep had proven its concept. The intelligence gathered had been invaluable. Rodriguez had already accomplished more than anyone had thought possible. There was no shame in stepping back before German countermeasures became effective. Rodriguez declined immediately. The Jeep represented more than just a successful modification project. It represented proof that American innovation could overcome any tactical disadvantage. It demonstrated that individual initiative and mechanical expertise could change the outcome of entire operations. Rodriguez wasn't just driving a fast Jeep, he was proving that American soldiers could outthink, outbuild, and outfight anything the enemy could produce. The mission that would test Rodriguez's philosophy came down through channels on March 14th. Intelligence had identified a major German armoured concentration near the town of Limburg, 30 miles behind enemy lines. The concentration included elements of 3 panzer divisions, possibly preparing for a counterattack against American forces crossing the Rhine. River Third Army needed detailed reconnaissance of German positions, force composition, and likely attack routes. The mission was designated high priority, maximum risk. Previous reconnaissance attempts had failed. 2 M8 Greyhound crews had been destroyed attempting to penetrate German defensive lines. 1 P-51 reconnaissance flight had been shot down by German fighters. The intelligence was critical, but the target area was heavily defended by the most experienced German units remaining in the European theatre. Rodriguez studied the mission, briefing carefully. The target area was 43 miles from American lines. The route passed through 3 defensive zones manned by German infantry, anti-tank guns, and mobile reserves. The return journey would be even more dangerous because German forces would be alerted and actively hunting for his Jeep. Speed would be essential, but so would tactical intelligence and precise navigation. The Jeep carried enough fuel for 180 miles at maximum speed. The mission required approximately 120 miles of travel, leaving a reserve of 60 miles for evasive maneuvers and unexpected detours. Rodriguez calculated fuel consumption rates at various speeds, planned refueling stops at captured German fuel dumps, identified alternate routes in case primary roads were blocked or heavily defended. He also prepared the Jeep for extended high-speed operation. The Packard engine had been designed for aircraft use, with cooling systems optimized for high-altitude flight ground operation. At maximum power, generated more heat than the standard cooling system could handle. Rodriguez installed additional radiator capacity, upgraded the coolant circulation pump, added external oil coolers to prevent engine overheating during prolonged acceleration. The armament was minimal by necessity. Weight reduction was critical for maximum performance. Rodriguez carried his personal M1 carbine, 200 rounds of ammunition, 4 hand grenades, and a Thompson submachine gun with 6 magazines. The Jeep itself mounted no weapons. Every pound of armor or armament was a pound that reduced speed, and speed was the only protection that mattered on this mission. Communication equipment included a standard SCR 300 radio for contact with American forces and a German radio captured during previous reconnaissance missions. The German radio would allow Rodriguez to monitor Wehrmacht communications, providing advance warning of enemy movements and defensive preparations. Understanding what German forces were planning could be the difference between successful reconnaissance and walking into a carefully prepared trap. Rodriguez departed American lines at 0200 hours on March 15, 1945. The night was overcast, no moon, perfect conditions for avoiding German observation posts. He drove without headlights, navigating by compass and terrain recognition. The Packard engine ran whisper quiet at low throttle settings, producing less noise than a standard Jeep engine. He could approach German positions undetected as long as he maintained moderate speeds. The first German checkpoint appeared at 0347 hours. 2 guards in a wooden shelter beside the road, probably reservists, older men assigned to rear area security duties. Rodriguez could see cigarette smoke drifting from the shelter window. He stopped the Jeep 400 yards away, cut the engine, listened, radio chatter in German, casual conversation about the cold weather and when their relief would arrive. No indication they'd detected his approach. Rodriguez had two options: circle around the checkpoint through the forest, adding 12 miles to his route, or eliminate the guards and continue on the main road. The forest route would cost fuel and time. The direct approach risked alerting German communications networks. He chose a third option that only his jeep could execute. He restarted the Packard engine, kept it at idle, rolled forward slowly until he was 200 yards from the checkpoint. Then he floored the accelerator. The jeep launched forward like a rocket. The guards heard the engine roar, stumbled out of their shelter, raised their rifles. Rodriguez was past them before they could aim. The speedometer hit 75 miles per hour as he disappeared around a curve. The entire encounter lasted 8 seconds. The guards radioed reports of an unidentified vehicle moving at high speed toward Limburg. German communications networks came alive with warnings and requests for information. Rodriguez monitored the traffic on his captured radio. Multiple units were being alerted, but none of them understood what they were looking for. The descriptions were confused, contradictory. Some guards reported a tank moving at impossible speed. Others described an aircraft flying at ground level. Rodriguez pressed deeper into German territory. The roads were better here, properly maintained, designed for military traffic. The jeep could maintain 65 miles per hour on the straight sections, 45 miles per hour through the curves. He was covering ground faster than German communications could coordinate a response. By the time one checkpoint reported his passage, he was already approaching the next defensive line. The second checkpoint was more serious: a roadblock with steel barriers, 4 guards, a machine gun position. Rodriguez spotted it from half a mile away, pulled into a tree line, studied the position through binoculars. Professional soldiers, alert, disciplined. They'd received the radio warnings from the first checkpoint. The machine gun was positioned to cover the road approaches. Steel barriers would stop any vehicle that tried to ram through. Rodriguez calculated angles, distances, approach speeds. The roadblock was positioned at the bottom of a small hill. The guards had excellent visibility of the road, but limited sight lines into the surrounding forest. If he could approach from an unexpected direction, he might catch them unprepared. But the terrain around the roadblock was rough, broken by ditches and fence posts. Any normal vehicle would bog down immediately. The Packard engine had enough torque to pull the jeep through terrain that would stop a Sherman tank. Rodriguez drove into the forest, picked his way between the trees, found a route that paralleled the road 50 yards to the east. The suspension handled the rough ground perfectly. The massive power output meant he could maintain speed even while climbing over fallen logs and through muddy stream beds. He emerged from the tree line directly beside the roadblock. The guards were watching the road, expecting any threat to approach from the north or south. Rodriguez materialized from the forest at 40 miles per hour, accelerated across open ground, jumped a drainage ditch, and landed on the road behind their position. The guards spun around, tried to traverse their machine gun, fired wild bursts that went high and wide. Rodriguez was already 300 yards away and accelerating. The radio traffic became frantic. German commanders were demanding explanations, requesting air support, ordering increased patrols. But the reports were so confused that nobody could develop effective countermeasures. How do you stop a vehicle that can travel cross-country at speeds that seem impossible? How do you coordinate defences against something that appears and disappears faster than communications networks can respond? Rodriguez reached the outskirts of Limburg at 05:23 hours. Dawn was breaking, visibility improving, making concealment more difficult. But the early morning light also revealed his target. German armour was concentrated in 3 locations around the Town Panther tanks, Panzer IV medium tanks, self-propelled artillery, support vehicles. Exactly the intelligence Third Army needed. He parked the jeep in a ruined farmhouse, climbed to the second floor with binoculars and a camera. The German formation was larger than intelligence estimates had suggested. Rodriguez counted 47 armoured vehicles, including 12 Panther tanks. The Panthers were the most dangerous threat American forces would face. Their long 75mm guns could destroy Sherman tanks at ranges where American guns couldn't penetrate Panther armor. But Rodriguez noticed something that would change everything. The Panthers were positioned for road movement, not defensive operations. They were lined up in column formation, ready to move out quickly. This wasn't a defensive concentration. It was an attack force preparing to advance toward American lines. The intelligence was even more critical than anyone had realized. Rodriguez photographed every vehicle position, sketched the defensive layout, noted the condition of German equipment. Some of the Panzer's showed battle damage. Several vehicles were being worked on by maintenance crews. The German formation was powerful, but not at full strength. American commanders needed this information to plan their response to the expected counterattack. Movement in the German camp indicated preparations for departure. Crews were starting engines, checking equipment, forming up for road march. Rodriguez estimated they would begin moving within 2 hours. He had to get this intelligence back to American lines immediately. The success of the entire Rhine crossing operation might depend on how quickly Third Army could prepare for the German counterattack. Rodriguez returned to the Jeep, started the Packard engine, began the return journey. The route back would be more dangerous because German forces were now actively searching for his vehicle. Radio intercepts indicated that Wehrmacht units were positioning themselves along likely escape routes. Roadblocks were being reinforced. Anti-aircraft guns were being repositioned to engage ground targets. But Rodriguez had one advantage the Germans couldn't counter. His Jeep was fast enough to outrun their response time. Even if they detected him, even if they positioned forces to intercept him, the speed differential was so massive that their preparations became irrelevant. By the time German units reached their assigned positions, Rodriguez would already be past them. The return journey became a high-speed chase across German countryside. Rodriguez maintained 70 miles per hour on straight roads, 50 miles per hour through villages, maximum possible speed across open terrain. The Packard engine performed flawlessly, delivering consistent power despite the sustained high-speed operation. The cooling system modifications prevented overheating. The reinforced chassis handled the continuous stress without failure. German forces attempted intercepts at 3 locations. Motorcycle units tried to pace the Jeep on parallel roads. Anti-aircraft guns fired at maximum depression, trying to hit a ground target moving faster than aircraft normally flew. At low-altitude infantry units positioned themselves at road intersections, hoping to catch Rodriguez during speed-reducing turns. None of the intercept attempts succeeded. The motorcycles couldn't match the Jeep's speed on rough terrain. The anti-aircraft guns couldn't track a target moving erratically at ground level. The infantry units were positioned based on normal vehicle speeds, not the capabilities of Rodriguez's modified Jeep. He was through their positions before they could react. At 06:47 hours, Rodriguez encountered the situation that would become legendary throughout the Third Army. 6 German Panther tanks were moving along a road that intersected his planned route. The Panthers were travelling in column formation, spaced 100 yards apart, moving at their maximum cross-country speed of 34 miles per hour. Rodriguez was approaching from their left flank at 68 miles per hour. The lead Panther spotted the Jeep when Rodriguez was 800 yards away. The tank commander probably thought he was seeing an American reconnaissance vehicle that had wandered into a trap. 6 Panthers against 1 Jeep should have been no contest. The German commander ordered his gunner to engage the target. The 75mm gun traversed toward Rodriguez's position. Rodriguez saw the gun barrel turning, calculated the intercept angle, made a decision that violated every rule of military common sense. Instead of turning away from the Panthers, he accelerated directly toward them. The speedometer climbed past 70, past 75, approaching 80 miles per hour. The Jeep was moving so fast that the Panther gunner couldn't track it properly. The first shot went wide by 50 yards. The other 5 Panthers opened fire simultaneously. 75mm shells screamed past the Jeep, exploding in the fields around Rodriguez's position, but hitting a target moving at 80 miles per hour, while firing from a platform moving at 34 miles per hour required gunnery skills that exceeded human capabilities. The German gunners were experienced, professional, but they'd never engaged anything moving this fast. Rodriguez reached the road intersection before the Panthers could reload. He turned hard right, tires screaming, the Jeep leaning at angles that should have caused it to roll over. The reinforced suspension and low centre of gravity kept all four wheels on the ground. He accelerated down the road the Panthers had just travelled, now moving in the same direction as the German column. The Panther commanders faced an impossible tactical situation. They were being overtaken by an enemy vehicle, moving twice their maximum speed. Their guns couldn't traverse fast enough to track the target. Their own movement prevented accurate gunnery. Rodriguez was using the Germans' forward momentum against them, making interception mathematically impossible. The chase continued for 3 miles. Rodriguez maintained 78 miles per hour, while the Panthers struggled to keep pace at 34 miles per hour. The gap widened continuously. Radio intercepts revealed the frustration in German communications. Panther commanders were requesting air support, calling for artillery strikes, demanding explanations for how an American vehicle could outrun their most advanced tanks. Rodriguez pulled away from the Panther column, turned onto a side road, disappeared into the German countryside. The Panthers continued their original mission, but their commanders filed reports that would puzzle German intelligence for weeks. How had American forces developed ground vehicles capable of such performance? What other technological surprises were the Allies preparing? The final 30 miles to American lines passed without major incident. German forces were concentrated around fixed positions, not patrol areas. Rodriguez avoided the known strong points, used farm roads and forest tracks, maintained maximum speed wherever terrain permitted. The Packard engine showed no signs of stress, despite 2 hours of sustained high-performance operation. Rodriguez crossed into American territory at 0847 hours, exactly 6 hours and 47 minutes after departure. He'd covered 127 miles, penetrated 30 miles behind enemy lines, gathered critical intelligence, and returned safely despite encountering substantial German opposition. The mission was a complete success, but the real significance wouldn't become clear until German forces began their counterattack 18 hours later. The intelligence Rodriguez gathered allowed Third Army commanders to position their forces perfectly for the German assault. When the Panther column he'd encountered attacked American positions near Limburg, they found prepared defences, pre-positioned anti-tank guns, and artillery coordinates already calculated for their approach routes. The German counterattack was destroyed before it could achieve any tactical objectives. But Rodriguez's Jeep had accomplished something beyond successful reconnaissance. It had demonstrated that American technological innovation could overcome any German advantage. The psychological impact rippled through both armies. German soldiers who witnessed the Jeep's performance began to question whether their equipment was truly superior. American forces gained confidence that their ingenuity could triumph over enemy technology. Word of Rodriguez's achievement spread rapidly through Allied communications networks. Within days, requests were pouring in from reconnaissance units across the European theatre. Could similar modifications be performed on other vehicles? Were additional aircraft engines available for conversion? How quickly could high-speed reconnaissance capabilities be expanded to other divisions? The answers revealed the unique nature of Rodriguez's accomplishment. The engine swap had succeeded because of specific circumstances that couldn't be easily replicated. The crashed P-51 provided an undamaged Packard engine. Rodriguez's mechanical expertise enabled the complex modifications. The Jeep's lightweight construction could accommodate the massive power increase. Most importantly, Rodriguez possessed the driving skills necessary to control 1,400 horsepower in a 3,000-pound vehicle. Attempts to duplicate the modification at other locations produced mixed results. 3 similar conversions were completed before the war ended, but none achieved the performance levels of Rodriguez's original. The combination of mechanical perfection and driver capability that made the first Jeep successful proved impossible to systematize. Rodriguez had created something unique, unrepeatable, legendary. The Jeep continued operational service until May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered. Rodriguez completed 23 reconnaissance missions, gathered intelligence that influenced major tactical decisions, and never sustained serious damage despite operating in the most dangerous areas of the European theatre. The vehicle's success rate was unprecedented in the history of military reconnaissance operations. After the German surrender, Rodriguez faced a choice that would define the rest of his military career. The army wanted to study his Jeep, document the modifications, possibly develop the conversion into standard procedure. Engineers from Detroit arrived at his motor pool with measuring tools and technical drawings. They wanted to understand how a mechanic from East Los Angeles had solved problems that had stumped automotive designers for decades. The technical analysis took 3 weeks. Engineers examined every modification, tested the engine installation, measured performance characteristics. Their conclusions filled a 47-page report that reached the highest levels of Army procurement. The conversion was mechanically sound, operationally successful, and completely impractical for mass production. The obstacles were insurmountable. Packard aircraft engines cost 14 times more than standard Jeep power plants. The modification required 60 hours of skilled labour per vehicle. The fuel consumption was massive. Most critically, the driving skills necessary to control the vehicle safely couldn't be taught to average soldiers in reasonable time. Rodriguez demonstrated this during the engineering evaluation. 3 experienced drivers attempted to operate the Jeep at combat speeds. The first driver lost control during a high-speed turn and rolled the vehicle. The second driver couldn't manage the clutch engagement smoothly and stalled repeatedly. The third driver handled the power adequately, but couldn't navigate rough terrain at the speeds necessary for combat effectiveness. The Army offered Rodriguez a commission and assignment to the Ordnance Corps. He would lead development programs for high-performance military vehicles. The work would be challenging, important, well compensated. Rodriguez would have resources, authority, opportunity to revolutionize military transportation. His innovations could influence vehicle design for decades. Rodriguez declined. He wanted to return to Los Angeles, reopen his father's garage, work on civilian automobiles. The war was over. He'd proven what needed proving. American ingenuity could overcome any obstacle, solve any problem, defeat any enemy. That proof was enough. He didn't need rank or recognition or official acknowledgement of his achievements. But the army wasn't finished with Rodriguez's Jeep. Intelligence analysts had been studying German communications intercepted during Rodriguez's missions. The psychological impact of his vehicle had been more significant than anyone realized. German soldiers reported encounters with American equipment that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Morale declined in units that faced Rodriguez's reconnaissance missions. One intercepted German report described American technological capabilities in terms that bordered on panic. The report suggested that American forces possessed vehicles capable of performance levels that German engineers couldn't explain. If Americans could modify standard equipment to achieve such results, what other surprises were they preparing? What other advantages did they possess? The intelligence value extended beyond immediate tactical benefits. German engineering resources had been diverted to investigate American vehicle modifications. Research programs were initiated to understand how the performance had been achieved. Valuable time and materials were wasted trying to counter a threat that existed in only one vehicle operated by one exceptionally skilled driver. Rodriguez's Jeep had become a psychological weapon that multiplied American capabilities far beyond its actual impact. German forces began reporting encounters with high-speed American vehicles that probably never existed. Intelligence networks became focused on threats that were largely imaginary. The effect was strategic deception, achieved through genuine technical innovation. Military historians later classified Rodriguez's achievement as one of the most successful individual initiatives of the European campaign. The intelligence gathered during his 23 missions influenced 12 major tactical decisions. The psychological impact affected German morale across 3 defensive sectors. The total cost of the modification was approximately $2,800 in parts and labor. The return on investment was impossible to calculate precisely, but conservative estimates suggested that Rodriguez's Jeep had contributed to shortening the war by several days. The intelligence he provided prevented German counterattacks that could have delayed Allied advances. The psychological impact reduced German fighting effectiveness in key sectors. The cumulative effect saved thousands of American lives. Rodriguez returned to civilian life in June 1945. He reopened Miguel's garage on Whittier Boulevard using his military savings and a small business loan. The neighborhood had changed during the war years. Many families had moved away for defense work, others had lost sons in combat. But the need for reliable automotive repair remained constant. The garage prospered gradually. Rodriguez's reputation for solving impossible mechanical problems attracted customers from across Los Angeles. He could diagnose engine troubles that baffled other mechanics. He could repair vehicles that other shops declared beyond salvation. His wartime experience with improvised solutions and salvaged parts translated perfectly to civilian automotive work. Rodriguez never advertised his military service. He didn't display medals or commendations. Customers who asked about his background received simple answers. He'd been a mechanic in the army. He'd worked on vehicles in Europe. Nothing more specific. The story of the fastest Jeep in World War II remained known only to his former unit members and intelligence analysts who'd studied the mission reports. But other mechanics noticed Rodriguez's unusual capabilities. He could modify engines to produce power outputs that seemed impossible. He understood automotive systems with intuitive completeness that couldn't be learned from technical manuals. Young mechanics sought him out for training, hoping to acquire his skills. Rodriguez accepted apprentices selectively. He taught them proper techniques, professional ethics, respect for mechanical precision. But he also taught them something more valuable. He taught them to see problems as opportunities for innovation. Every broken vehicle was a chance to discover better solutions. Every limitation was an invitation to creative thinking. The lesson extended beyond automotive repair. Rodriguez had learned during the war that individual initiative could change the outcome of entire operations. One person with the right skills, determination, and willingness to break conventional rules could accomplish things that large organizations couldn't achieve. That principle applied to civilian life as clearly as military service. By 1950, Rodriguez employed 6 mechanics and operated the most successful independent garage in East Los Angeles. His reputation extended throughout Southern California. Customers brought him vehicles that had defeated other repair shops. Hot rod enthusiasts sought his expertise for performance modifications. Racing teams consulted him about engine development. Rodriguez never forgot the lessons learned from his Packard-powered Jeep. Power without control was dangerous. Innovation without purpose was wasteful. Speed without direction accomplished nothing. The most sophisticated equipment was useless. Without skilled operators, success required combining technical excellence with practical wisdom. These principles guided every project Rodriguez undertook. He wouldn't modify a customer's engine unless he was confident they could handle the additional power safely. He wouldn't attempt repairs unless he understood the underlying mechanical problems completely. He wouldn't promise results he couldn't deliver reliably. The approach earned Rodriguez respect throughout the automotive community. Manufacturers consulted him about design problems. Racing organizations sought his technical expertise. Engineering schools invited him to speak about practical applications of theoretical principles. Rodriguez had become recognized as one of the most innovative mechanics in American automotive history, but the recognition came without public acknowledgement of his wartime achievements. The classified nature of his reconnaissance missions meant that the full story couldn't be told. Military records remained sealed. Intelligence reports stayed locked in government archives. Rodriguez's greatest accomplishment remained officially secret decades after the war ended. The secrecy didn't trouble Rodriguez. He'd accomplished what mattered most. He'd proven that American innovation could overcome any obstacle. He'd demonstrated that individual initiative could change the course of history. He'd survived the war and built a successful civilian career using skills learned under impossible conditions. The Jeep itself had disappeared into military surplus channels. After the engineering evaluation, it was shipped to Aberdeen Proving Ground for additional testing. The vehicle performed flawlessly through hundreds of miles of trials. Engineers documented every aspect of the modification, photographed every component, analysed every performance characteristic. Then the Jeep was quietly retired. The Packard engine was removed and returned to aircraft surplus inventory. The chassis was restored to standard configuration and assigned to routine transportation duties. Within 6 months, no physical evidence remained of the most successful vehicle modification in military history. The documentation survived in classified archives, technical drawings, performance data, mission reports, intelligence analyses. Future military historians would study these records, trying to understand how one mechanic had achieved results that seemed impossible, but the vehicle itself was gone, dismantled in the name of bureaucratic efficiency. Rodriguez learned about the Jeep's fate through unofficial channels. A former army mechanic who'd worked at Aberdeen contacted him in 1947. The conversation was brief, careful, mindful of security regulations. But the message was clear. Rodriguez's creation had been destroyed by the same system that had originally enabled its construction. The irony didn't surprise Rodriguez. Military bureaucracy operated according to regulations that prioritized standardization over innovation. Individual achievements that couldn't be systematized were viewed as problems rather than successes. The same mentality that had initially opposed his modifications had ultimately eliminated them, but the principles behind Rodriguez's achievement couldn't be destroyed. The willingness to challenge conventional limitations, the ability to see opportunities where others saw obstacles, the determination to succeed despite official opposition. These qualities existed in every generation of American innovators, waiting for circumstances that would allow them to flourish. Rodriguez recognized these qualities in the young mechanics who worked for him. They possessed the same curiosity, the same dissatisfaction with arbitrary limitations, the same desire to prove that better solutions were possible. His job was to channel their energy constructively, teach them to balance innovation with responsibility, show them how individual excellence could serve larger purposes. The lessons were taught through practical demonstration rather than formal instruction. Rodriguez would present apprentices with seemingly impossible repair challenges, engines that wouldn't run despite proper maintenance, transmissions that failed under normal operating conditions, electrical systems that defied logical diagnosis. Then he would guide them through the problem-solving process. Examine the evidence carefully. Question assumptions that seemed obvious. Consider solutions that violated conventional wisdom. Test hypotheses systematically. Learn from failures without abandoning the attempt. Persist until breakthrough understanding emerged. The method produced mechanics who could solve problems that defeated others. They understood that every limitation was potentially temporary. Every obstacle was potentially surmountable. Every failure was potentially educational. They approached mechanical challenges with confidence born from successful experience with seemingly impossible situations. Rodriguez's influence extended beyond his immediate employees. Mechanics trained in his shop carried his methods to other locations. They established their own businesses, trained their own apprentices, spread the philosophy of innovative problem-solving throughout the automotive industry. The principles that had guided the Packard Jeep modification continued influencing American mechanical development decades after the war. The impact was measurable in improved vehicle reliability, enhanced performance capabilities, reduced repair costs. American automobiles of the 1950s and 1960s reflected engineering approaches that traced back to wartime innovations, like Rodriguez's engine swap. The willingness to challenge conventional limitations had become embedded in American automotive culture. But Rodriguez remained focused on immediate, practical concerns. Each customer's vehicle presented unique challenges that required individual solutions. Every repair job was an opportunity to demonstrate that American mechanical expertise could overcome any problem. Success was measured in satisfied customers, reliable repairs, innovations that improved vehicle performance. The garage on Whittier Boulevard became legendary throughout Los Angeles. Customers traveled from distant cities to benefit from Rodriguez's expertise. Automotive journalists wrote articles about his innovations. Engineering students studied his modification techniques. Racing enthusiasts sought his advice about performance improvements. Rodriguez accepted the recognition modestly. He was a mechanic who'd learned his trade from his father, developed his skills through wartime necessity, and applied his knowledge to civilian problems. Nothing more complicated than that. The principles were simple: work hard, think clearly, never accept limitations as permanent, always look for better solutions. The principles had served him well during the most dangerous period of his life. They continued serving him during the peaceful prosperity of post-war America. They would guide him through whatever challenges the future might present. Innovation, determination, and practical wisdom were timeless qualities that transcended specific circumstances or historical periods. Rodriguez understood that his greatest achievement wasn't the fastest Jeep in World War II. It was proving that individual Americans possessed capabilities that could overcome any obstacle, solve any problem, defeat any enemy. That proof had value beyond military victory. It demonstrated the potential that existed within American society when circumstances allowed individual excellence to flourish. The demonstration continued every day in Rodriguez's garage. Every impossible repair that succeeded, every innovative solution that worked, every satisfied customer who spread word of exceptional service. Small victories that accumulated into lasting influence, proving repeatedly that American ingenuity remained as powerful in peace as it had been in war. The war had ended, but the principles that won it lived on, in places like Miguel's garage, where one Mexican-American mechanic continued proving that innovation could triumph over any limitation, determination could overcome any obstacle, and individual excellence could change the world one repair at a time. The legacy of Rodriguez's wartime innovation lived on in unexpected ways throughout the 1950s. Hot rod enthusiasts who'd heard whispered stories about the legendary Packard-powered Jeep began experimenting with aircraft engine swaps in civilian vehicles. Most attempts failed spectacularly. Aircraft engines required cooling systems, fuel delivery methods, and structural modifications that exceeded the capabilities of backyard mechanics, but a few succeeded. In 1952, a former B-24 mechanic named Danny Kowalski installed a Wright Cyclone radial engine in a 1940 Ford Coupe. The modification took 8 months and cost more than 3 new automobiles. The result was a street-legal vehicle that could accelerate from 0 to 100 miles per hour in under 8 seconds. Kowalski credited Rodriguez's wartime achievement as his inspiration. Similar projects appeared across America. A Navy veteran in San Diego built a Chevrolet pickup powered by an Allison Phi 12 from a P-38 Lightning. A former Army Air Force sergeant in Detroit created a Plymouth sedan that used a Pratt & Whitney engine from a B-17 bomber. Each project represented thousands of hours of fabrication work and innovative problem-solving. The hot rod movement embraced aircraft engine conversions as the ultimate expression of American mechanical creativity. Drag strips from California to Florida featured vehicles that roared with the distinctive sound of military power plants. Magazine articles documented the modifications in technical detail. Automotive shows displayed the most successful conversions to amazed crowds. Rodriguez watched this development with mixed feelings. He was proud that his wartime innovation had inspired civilian experimentation. The technical challenges these builders faced were identical to problems he'd solved in that German motor pool. Their solutions demonstrated the same mechanical ingenuity that had characterized his Packard Jeep project. But Rodriguez also understood the limitations these civilian builders couldn't overcome. Aircraft engines were designed for specific operating conditions that didn't exist in ground vehicles. Cooling requirements, fuel consumption, maintenance complexity, and operational reliability created problems that few amateur mechanics could solve effectively. Most aircraft engine swaps produced vehicles that were spectacular but impractical. The exception was racing applications, where reliability mattered less than maximum performance. Drag racing strips provided the perfect environment for aircraft-powered vehicles. Quarter-mile acceleration runs lasted less than 15 seconds. Cooling problems didn't have time to develop. Fuel consumption was irrelevant. Maintenance could be performed between runs. Several aircraft-powered drag races achieved remarkable success. A California team built a rail car powered by a Merlin engine from a P-51 Mustang. The vehicle could cover a quarter mile in under 9 seconds, reaching speeds approaching 180 miles per hour. The acceleration was so violent that drivers required special safety equipment to avoid injury from the G-forces. Professional racing organizations initially banned aircraft engine conversions as unfair competition. The power advantages were so massive that conventional automotive engines couldn't compete. But public interest in these exotic machines was enormous. Spectators packed drag strips to witness vehicles that sounded like fighter planes and accelerated like rockets. Eventually, racing sanctioning bodies created separate classes for aircraft-powered vehicles. The category attracted builders who pushed the boundaries of what was mechanically possible. Engines from bombers, fighters, transport planes, and experimental aircraft found new life in purpose-built racing machines. Each conversion required innovative solutions to problems that existed nowhere else in automotive engineering. Rodriguez occasionally consulted on these racing projects. His reputation as the originator of successful aircraft engine swaps brought requests for technical advice from builders across the country. He would examine their plans, suggest modifications, warn about potential problems, and occasionally agree to supervise critical installation procedures. One project particularly impressed Rodriguez. A group of former Air Force mechanics in Texas had acquired a complete Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine from a scrapped F4U Corsair. The 18-cylinder radial engine produced 2,400 horsepower, making it one of the most powerful aircraft engines ever manufactured. They wanted to install it in a custom-built chassis for unlimited-class drag racing. The technical challenges were staggering. The engine weighed 2,400 pounds, required 115-octane aviation fuel, and generated heat levels that could melt conventional cooling systems. The torque output was sufficient to twist apart any standard automotive transmission. The exhaust system needed to handle temperatures that exceeded the melting point of steel. Rodriguez agreed to advise the project because it reminded him of his wartime situation. The Texas builders faced seemingly impossible obstacles with limited resources and no official support. They had to innovate solutions that didn't exist in any technical manual. Success required combining aircraft engineering principles with automotive fabrication techniques. The installation took 18 months. The chassis was custom-built from aircraft aluminum using welding techniques borrowed from bomber construction. The cooling system employed radiators from a B-29 Superfortress, circulation pumps from naval vessels, and heat exchangers designed for industrial applications. The transmission was a modified unit from a military tank. When completed, the vehicle weighed 4,200 pounds and could produce over 2,000 horsepower at the rear wheels. The exhaust note was indescribable, a sound that combined the roar of a fighter plane with the rumble of distant thunder. Spectators could feel the ground shake when the engine reached full power. The first test runs were conducted at a remote airfield in West Texas. The vehicle accelerated so violently that it lifted the front wheels off the ground for the entire length of the quarter mile. The elapsed time was 7.3 seconds with a terminal speed of 201 miles per hour. The performance exceeded that of contemporary aircraft during takeoff runs. Rodriguez attended the first official competition appearance at a drag strip near Houston. The crowd reaction was unlike anything he'd witnessed since the war. Thousands of spectators stood in absolute silence as the double Wasp engine started. The sound was so powerful, it triggered car alarms in the parking lot. When the vehicle launched, the acceleration was so brutal that several spectators became nauseous from watching. The run lasted 6.8 seconds. The vehicle covered the quarter mile faster than any ground-based machine in history. The terminal speed was 217 miles per hour, faster than many World War II fighter planes could achieve in level flight. The Texas builders had created something that transcended automotive engineering and entered the realm of aerospace technology. But Rodriguez recognized the fundamental limitation that prevented these achievements from having practical significance. The double Wasp vehicle required a support crew of 12 mechanics, consumed 47 gallons of aviation fuel per quarter-mile run, and needed complete engine rebuilds every 6 passes. The operating costs exceeded those of actual military aircraft. The wartime circumstances that had made Rodriguez's Jeep successful couldn't be replicated in civilian applications. Military necessity had justified any expense, any risk, any deviation from standard procedures. Civilian racing operated under different constraints, where practicality, reliability, and cost-effectiveness determined long-term viability. Rodriguez's Jeep had succeeded because it solved a critical military problem that couldn't be addressed through conventional means. The speed advantage provided tactical benefits that justified the technical complexity. The mission requirements matched the vehicle's capabilities perfectly. Those conditions rarely existed in civilian applications. By 1955, the aircraft engine conversion trend was declining. The initial excitement had faded as builders discovered the practical limitations. Maintenance costs were prohibitive. Fuel consumption was excessive. Reliability problems made the vehicles unsuitable for regular use. Most projects ended up as static displays rather than operational vehicles, but the influence of Rodriguez's wartime innovation continued in less obvious ways. Automotive engineers who'd studied the aircraft engine conversions applied lessons learned to conventional vehicle development. Techniques for handling extreme power outputs, managing thermal loads, and integrating disparate mechanical systems found applications in production automobiles. The American automotive industry of the late 1950s reflected engineering approaches that trace back to wartime innovations. High-performance engines, advanced cooling systems, heavy-duty transmissions, and sophisticated suspension designs all showed influences from military vehicle development. The boundaries between automotive and aerospace engineering had blurred permanently. Rodriguez observed these developments from his garage on Whittier Boulevard, where he continued solving mechanical problems that others considered impossible. Each successful repair reinforced the principles he'd learned during the war. Innovation required understanding fundamental mechanical principles, not just following established procedures. Creative thinking could overcome apparent limitations. Individual initiative could achieve results that large organizations couldn't match. The lessons remained relevant as automotive technology evolved. Fuel injection systems, turbocharging, electronic ignition, and computer-controlled engine management all required the same problem-solving approaches Rodriguez had used for his aircraft engine swap. The specific technologies changed, but the underlying principles remained constant. Young mechanics who worked for Rodriguez learned these principles through hands-on experience with challenging repairs. They discovered that mechanical systems operated according to physical laws that could be understood, predicted, and manipulated. Apparent limitations often reflected incomplete understanding rather than absolute constraints. Better solutions were usually possible for mechanics willing to think creatively. The training produced automotive specialists who could diagnose problems that defeated others, repair vehicles that seemed beyond salvation, and modify systems to achieve performance levels that exceeded factory specifications. They carried Rodriguez's influence throughout the automotive industry, establishing repair shops, working for manufacturers, teaching at technical schools. By 1960, Rodriguez had trained over 40 mechanics who'd gone on to successful careers throughout Southern California. Each carried forward the philosophy of innovative problem-solving, the willingness to challenge conventional limitations, and the determination to find better solutions regardless of apparent obstacles. The influence multiplied geometrically as these mechanics trained others. The impact extended beyond automotive applications. Mechanics trained by Rodriguez found their skills valuable in aerospace, industrial equipment, marine propulsion, and agricultural machinery. The problem-solving approaches that worked for automobile repair applied equally to any mechanical system. Innovation was transferable across technological boundaries. Rodriguez began receiving recognition from unexpected sources. The Society of Automotive Engineers invited him to present papers about unconventional repair techniques. Trade magazines published articles about his innovative solutions to common automotive problems. Technical schools requested his curriculum recommendations for training programs, but Rodriguez remained focused on practical work rather than theoretical recognition. His garage continued attracting customers with impossible mechanical problems. Each successful repair demonstrated that American mechanical expertise could overcome any challenge. The work was its own reward, requiring no additional validation. The garage had become an institution in East Los Angeles. 3 generations of families brought their vehicles to Rodriguez for repairs. Customers who'd moved to distant cities returned when they needed work that other mechanics couldn't perform. The reputation for excellence had created loyalty that transcended normal business relationships. Rodriguez understood that his success reflected more than individual skill. It represented the continuation of American mechanical traditions that had enabled victory in World War II. The willingness to innovate, the determination to succeed, the refusal to accept limitations as permanent. These qualities had defeated fascism and were now serving peacetime prosperity. The garage employed 12 mechanics by 1962, making it one of the largest independent repair facilities in Los Angeles. But Rodriguez maintained personal involvement in every challenging project. He wouldn't delegate problems that required innovative solutions. The most difficult repairs still received his direct attention. One such project arrived in March 1962. A customer brought a 1959 Cadillac with an unusual problem. The engine ran perfectly at idle and low speeds, but lost power completely above 3,000 RPM. Multiple mechanics had examined the vehicle. They'd replaced the carburetor, ignition system, fuel pump, and exhaust system. The problem persisted despite conventional repairs. Rodriguez spent 3 days diagnosing the issue. The symptoms suggested fuel starvation at high engine speeds, but all fuel system components tested normally. The mystery reminded him of complex problems he'd encountered during the war, situations where conventional solutions failed because the underlying assumptions were incorrect. The breakthrough came when Rodriguez discovered that the previous owner had installed an aftermarket air conditioning system. The installation had required modifications to the engine compartment that weren't documented in any service manual. One modification had inadvertently created a vacuum leak that only affected high-speed operation. The repair required fabricating a custom intake manifold gasket that sealed the vacuum leak without interfering with the air conditioning system. Rodriguez machined the gasket from materials that didn't exist when the Cadillac was manufactured. The solution combined traditional mechanical skills with innovative material applications. The Cadillac ran perfectly after the repair, but more importantly, the project demonstrated that mechanical problem-solving principles learned during wartime remained applicable to civilian challenges. Innovation was still the key to overcoming apparent limitations. Creative thinking could still achieve results that conventional approaches couldn't match. Rodriguez realized that his greatest contribution wasn't the fastest Jeep in World War II. It was proving that individual Americans possessed capabilities that could triumph over any obstacle, solve any problem, overcome any limitation. That proof remained as valuable in 1962 as it had been in 1945. The demonstration continued daily in his garage, where impossible repairs succeeded through innovative thinking, where mechanical problems yielded to creative solutions, where American ingenuity proved its continued relevance to an increasingly complex world. The war had ended 17 years earlier, but the principles that had won it lived on in places where individual excellence still mattered. Rodriguez looked forward to continuing that demonstration for as many years as his health and energy would permit. There would always be mechanical problems that challenged conventional solutions. There would always be customers who needed repairs that other mechanics couldn't perform. There would always be opportunities to prove that innovation, determination, and skill could overcome any limitation. The fastest Jeep in World War II had been dismantled decades earlier, but its legacy lived on in every successful repair, every innovative solution, every satisfied customer who experienced the difference that individual excellence could make. That legacy would continue as long as Americans maintained the willingness to challenge limitations, the determination to find better solutions, and the confidence that innovation could triumph over any obstacle, The story of Rodriguez's Packard-powered Jeep didn't end with the war's conclusion. In classified military archives, intelligence analysts continued studying the psychological impact his vehicle had created within German ranks. Intercepted Wehrmacht communications from April 1945 revealed the extent of confusion Rodriguez's Jeep had generated among enemy forces. One particularly detailed German report described encounters with what they termed the Phantom reconnaissance vehicle. The document, translated by Allied intelligence officers, painted a picture of German units that had become genuinely fearful of American technological capabilities. Panzer commanders reported vehicle speeds that seemed to violate physical laws. Infantry units described engine sounds that resembled aircraft but originated from ground-based sources. The psychological warfare value extended far beyond what Rodriguez could have imagined while conducting his missions. German engineering resources were diverted from legitimate military projects to investigate American vehicle modifications that existed in only one example. Research facilities wasted months trying to understand how the performance had been achieved. Valuable materials and skilled technicians were assigned to counter a threat that was largely singular. Military historians later discovered that German High Command had initiated 3 separate investigation programs based solely on reports of Rodriguez's Jeep. One program attempted to develop similar high-speed reconnaissance vehicles for Wehrmacht use. Another focused on defensive measures against fast-moving American ground targets. The third investigated whether American forces possessed other technological advantages that hadn't been identified. Rodriguez died in 1998, at age 76, taking with him the memory of 17 terrifying minutes when American ingenuity outran German steel. His obituary mentioned his service as an army mechanic, his successful garage, his 3 children. It said nothing about the fastest Jeep in World War II, nothing about the Panzer column that couldn't catch him, nothing about how one man's impossible idea changed reconnaissance warfare forever. But in the end, that's exactly how Rodriguez would have wanted it. The proof was in the work, not the recognition. The legacy lived in every mechanic who refused to accept that something couldn't be done.